The fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit vibrated with a dull, sickening hum that made my split stitches throb. My left hand was still bound by white gauze, a thick plastic IV tube feeding antibiotics directly into my vein. I could still smell the chemical tang of the operating room clinging to my skin, but the absolute coldest chill wasn't coming from the hospital air conditioning. It was coming from the printed spreadsheet trembling in my right hand. "He did it while the anesthesia was still putting you under, Leo," whispered Sarah, our head payroll clerk, her voice cracking as she checked the hallway. "The ink on the corporate transfer wasn't even dry when the banks locked you out." I stared down at the rows of numbers. My younger brother, Julian, hadn't just stepped in as temporary manager while I was under the knife for a ruptured appendix. He had completely rewritten the corporate structure of Thorne Sons Contracting. Every single dollar of our active infrastructure accounts had been rerouted. But Julian made one massive, fatal mistake. In his frantic rush to completely strip my name from our father's multi-million-dollar legacy, he left the legacy payroll database running on the old server, a server he forgot I built with my own hands. The digital footprint didn't just show an illegal corporate takeover. It revealed an active, multi-year money laundering scheme that went all the way back to when our father was still alive. Julian thought he had buried me in a hospital bed. He believed my sudden medical emergency was his golden ticket to absolute control. He had no idea that those encrypted payroll entries were about to dismantle his entire life by tomorrow morning. I am currently sitting in the passenger seat of Sarah's worn-out sedan, staring up at the grand glass entrance of Thorne Sons corporate headquarters. The morning sun reflects off the tinted windows, making the building look like a fortress. My abdomen burns like fire with every shallow breath I take, a reminder that I checked myself out against medical advice exactly 2 hours ago. My doctor yelled at me, warning me about internal bleeding. But if I don't walk through those glass doors today, I won't have a company left to defend. The conflict surrounding Thorne Sons isn't just about brick and mortar. It's a $12 million commercial enterprise that handles the heavy concrete and steel frameworks for the entire tri-state area. When our father, Thomas Thorne, passed away 6 months ago from a sudden heart attack, he left the business divided equally between Julian and me. I was the eldest, the operations guy who wore muddy steel-toed boots and lived on the active job sites. Julian was the finance guy, the one who stayed in the air-conditioned office wearing tailored suits and managing the corporate ledgers. Since the funeral, Julian had been acting incredibly distant, constantly whispering behind closed doors with a new group of outside investors. He kept telling me that the company was bleeding cash, that our father had left behind massive, hidden operational debts that we needed to liquidate immediately. "We need to streamline things, Leo," he would tell me, staring at his gold watch during our brief morning status updates. "The old ways of doing business are dying. Your field crews are costing us too much in overtime." The sheer injustice of his words choked me. I was the brother who sacrificed everything, while Julian was living in a luxury penthouse downtown, charging his expensive dinners to the company credit card. I was waking up at 3 in the morning in freezing downpours to make sure our bridge cranes were anchored safely. I knew every laborer, every crane operator, and every truck driver by their first name. Now, using a sudden medical crisis as his weapon, Julian had officially declared me incapacitated to the board of directors. He had frozen my corporate accounts, terminated my active field authority, and signed an emergency resolution giving himself absolute executive control. He thought because I was trapped in a hospital gown, I would simply accept the defeat. But as my fingers tighten around the flash drive containing the raw, unaltered payroll data from the old server, a completely cold wave of focus washes over me. The power dynamic in this company is about to shatter, and Julian is about to learn exactly what happens when you try to demolish a foundation built by an engineer.
To truly understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand the smell of Thorne Sons. For 30 years, my life was defined by the scent of wet diesel exhaust, fresh hydraulic fluid, and the sharp, metallic tang of arc welding sparks cutting through the early morning fog. Our father, Thomas Thorne, was a mountain of a man. He had rough, calloused hands that looked like they were carved out of solid granite, but he carried a spirit of absolute fairness that earned him the unwavering loyalty of every union worker in the county. He built this business from a single dump truck and an old wooden shed. "Leo," Dad would say to me when I was just 12 years old, sitting on the steel tracks of our first heavy bulldozer while the sun set over the quarry, "a structure is only as reliable as its lowest bearing point. If you build on a lie or if you skimp on the reinforcement steel, the whole thing will eventually come raining down on your head. You treat the men right, you keep your books clean, and you never leave a partner behind in the dirt." I lived by that code. I didn't go away to an elite business school like Julian did. The day I graduated high school, Dad handed me a pair of work boots and a shovel. "You learn the business from the bottom up, just like I did," he told me with a proud grin. I spent my 20s digging trenches, tying heavy rebar grids in 90-degree heat, and learning how to read complex structural blueprints until my eyes blurred. I earned the respect of the field crews because I bled alongside them. When a concrete pour went late into the night, I was the one holding the vibrator hose covered in gray sludge right next to the laborers. Julian, however, was always protected from the dirt. He was 4 years younger, smaller, and possessed a slick, fast-talking charm that Dad always found incredibly impressive. Our mother passed away when we were very young, so Dad tended to overindulge Julian, wanting to protect him from the harsh realities of the construction yards. Julian went to an expensive private university, paid for entirely by the sweat of the field operations. He came back with a master's degree in corporate finance and an absolute disdain for the actual work we did. "The real money isn't in pouring mud, Leo," Julian would sneer, adjusting his pristine silk tie whenever he walked past the maintenance shops. "We're running a multi-million-dollar business like a local plumbing shop. It's embarrassing." Dad tried to balance our personalities, but as his heart began to fail him during his final years, he grew increasingly weary of the constant bickering. He relied heavily on me to keep the projects on schedule while allowing Julian to handle the tax filings and bank reconciliations. I remember a cold winter evening just 2 years ago before Dad's health took a sharp turn for the worse. We were sitting in the old wood-paneled office at the yard, drinking black coffee out of stained ceramic mugs. Grandma Clara's old handmade quilt was draped over Dad's frail shoulders. "Leo," Dad whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at the glowing digital monitors showing the company's active financial spreadsheets, "keep an eye on your brother. He's getting involved with some aggressive venture capitalists in the city. They talk about leveraging assets and tax shielding, but it sounds like pure greed to me. Don't let him lose the soul of this company. The men depend on us." I promised I would. I genuinely believed that Julian's arrogance was just a young businessman's phase, a desire to prove himself in a company dominated by older men. I thought that if I kept the projects highly profitable, if I maintained our flawless safety record, Julian would eventually see that the strength of Thorne Sons lay in its honesty. I never suspected that while I was out in the field ensuring our structures could withstand earthquakes, my own brother was quietly undermining the very ground beneath my feet, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the lever. The subtle warning signs began to manifest about 4 months ago, shortly after the probate courts officially finalized the transition of our shared ownership. It started with minor, unusual discrepancies in our equipment maintenance schedules. I distinctly remember walking into the heavy truck garage late one Friday evening to check on a crane that had been throwing an engine code. I found our chief mechanic, Mac, sitting on an overturned oil drum, staring at a piece of paper with a look of deep frustration. "What's wrong, Mac?" I asked, wiping grease off my hands with a rag. "Did the replacement parts not come in?" "They came in, Leo," Max said, shaking his head slowly as he handed me a corporate requisition form. "But Julian denied the order for the grade A high-tensile rigging cables. He told me to source some cheaper alternatives from an overseas liquidator. I told him it was a massive safety violation for our bridge jobs, but he just told me to mind my own business and balance the budget." I felt a sudden knot form in my stomach. I took the form directly to Julian's executive office the next morning. The room was immaculate, smelling of expensive leather and premium espresso, a stark contrast to the diesel-stained air of the maintenance yards. "Julian, what is this?" I demanded, dropping the rejected safety requisition onto his pristine glass desk. "We don't compromise on rigging cables. Dad would have fired anyone who even suggested using uncertified steel." Julian didn't look up from his laptop for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were cold, entirely devoid of the warmth we used to share as kids. "Leo, you need to understand that the operational costs under your management are completely out of control," he said, his voice smooth but dangerous. "We are facing a major liquidity crunch. I am the chief financial officer of this company, and I have the authority to manage our vendor expenses. Stop micromanaging the back office." Then the emotional neglect turned toward our longest-serving employees. During our bi-weekly management meetings, Julian began proposing massive cuts to the field laborers' health insurance and retirement contributions, claiming the adjustments were necessary to keep our project bids competitive. "These men have been with Dad for 20 years, Julian," I argued, my voice rising in the quiet boardroom. "We don't take away their benefits." "They are lines on a ledger, Julian," Max snapped back, his face flushing with irritation. "And right now, those lines are too thick. If they don't like the new packages, they can go find work with our non-union competitors." I noticed that Sarah, our veteran payroll clerk, started looking at me with a strange expression whenever I entered the administrative trailer. She looked terrified, her eyes constantly darting toward Julian's office door. Twice, I saw her quickly close out of her accounting software when I approached her desk. "Is everything all right with the payroll accounts, Sarah?" I asked her at one afternoon, leaning against the counter. I can't talk right now, Leo," she whispered, her hands shaking as she organized a stack of time cards. "Just please check the certified project ledgers yourself when you get a chance. The numbers aren't matching the field hours you're turning in." Before I could investigate further, my own body betrayed me. The dull, persistent ache in my lower right abdomen that I had been ignoring for weeks suddenly flared into a blinding, agonizing torment during an afternoon site inspection. I collapsed on the gravel lot of our municipal bridge project, unable to move, vomiting from the pure intensity of the pain. The field supervisor called an ambulance, and within an hour, I was being prepped for emergency surgery to remove a severely infected appendix that was on the verge of bursting. As they rolled my gurney down the brightly lit hospital corridor, I saw Julian standing by the reception desk. He wasn't looking at me with concern. He was furiously typing on his phone, a strange, calculating expression on his face that sent a shiver straight down my spine. The true nightmare began the moment I opened my eyes in the recovery room. My mind was still incredibly foggy from the heavy narcotics, the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor sounding like it was miles away. I reached for the plastic bedside table to find my phone, wanting to check on the morning concrete pour at the highway junction. The phone wasn't there. Instead, my brother Julian was sitting in the corner armchair, a dark leather briefcase resting on his lap. He looked remarkably sharp, completely unbothered by the sterile misery of the hospital room. "You're awake," Julian said, his voice entirely flat as he stood up and walked toward my bed. "The doctor says you're going to be out of commission for at least 2 weeks. Severe infection. You're lucky it didn't turn septic." "The highway job?" I croaked, my throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. "The trucks, did they arrive on time?"
"Don't worry about the highway job, Leo," Julian said, a cold, clinical smile appearing on his face. "In fact, you don't need to worry about any of the jobs anymore. While you were in the operating room, I called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. Given your chronic health issues and your inability to perform your executive duties safely, the board has voted to appoint me as the sole, unconstrained chief executive officer." I tried to sit up, but a sharp, blinding wave of agony tore through my abdomen, forcing me back onto the pillows. You can't do that. The shares, we're 50-50 partners." "We are partners in equity, yes, but operational management is determined by executive appointment. I have the backing of our primary credit facility. They were tired of dealing with a field manager who doesn't understand modern corporate structure. Your corporate phone has been deactivated. Your access to the office servers is gone. Focus on your recovery, big brother. I'm running Thorne Sons now." He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the sterile silence. I felt completely paralyzed, a prisoner in my own broken body. 2 days passed in a blur of pure torment. I was completely cut off from the world. None of my field supervisors called me because Julian had issued a corporate directive stating that any employee contacting me would be immediately terminated for insubordination. The stakes increased exponentially on the third night. It was nearly 11 when the heavy wooden door of my hospital room quietly clicked open. I expected it to be a night nurse checking my vitals. Instead, Sarah, our head payroll clerk, slipped into the room. She was wearing a heavy winter coat, her face incredibly pale, clutching a thick manila folder against her chest. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice raspy, "what are you doing here? If Julian finds out—" "I don't care anymore, Leo," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pure rage. "What he's doing is wrong. It's illegal. He's destroying everything your father built." She dropped the manila folder onto my lap. Inside were copies of the official payroll records that Julian had compiled over the last 48 hours, along with historical reports from the old, disconnected server in the basement of the yard office. "Look at the active project hours for the municipal bridge contract," Sarah said, pointing a shaking finger at a column of numbers. "Julian has been billing the city for 40 full-time concrete laborers every single week for the past year. But look at the actual union field logs you turned in." I forced myself to focus through the lingering haze of the pain medication. My eyes widened as I processed the data. The field logs showed we only ever had 12 men on that site. "Who are the other 28 people, Sarah?" I asked, my blood turning to liquid ice. "They're not real construction workers, Leo," she whispered, tears finally leaking from her eyes. "They're shell companies and phantom names registered to a private holding firm in the Cayman Islands. Julian has been routing millions of dollars of municipal funding through our payroll department, pretending it's labor costs and sending it directly into his own private accounts. He's using Dad's company to commit massive, systematic corporate fraud. And now that he has sole authority, he's preparing to transfer the entire operational liability of those contracts directly into your name, making it look like you were the one managing the field hours." The room felt like it was spinning. The sheer, calculated malice of Julian's plan was staggering. He didn't just want to take the company, he needed me to be the fall guy for a multi-million-dollar federal crime that he had been orchestrating right under my nose. "How did you find this, Sarah?" I asked, my hands gripping the pages so tightly the paper began to tear. "Julian is smart with corporate banking, but he doesn't understand the old software," Sarah explained, wiping her eyes. When Dad bought the main server 15 years ago, you were the one who set up the localized backup arrays in the basement. Julian thought that by deleting the active files on the cloud network, the history was gone. He didn't realize the old terminal still logs every single transaction on an isolated hard drive. I went down there last night after the office cleared out. I copied everything onto this flash drive. She pulled a small silver USB drive from her pocket and placed it on top of the paperwork. There's a supporting character we need to bring in right now, Leo. My uncle is Marcus Vance. He's a retired federal prosecutor who now specializes in corporate whistleblower protection. I've already shown him a summary of the encryption logs. He said if you sign an emergency disclosure form, he can get a federal stay of execution on the board's resolution within 24 hours. Marcus Vance? I remembered the name. He was a notoriously brilliant legal strategist, a man known for his calm, lethal precision in unraveling corporate schemes. "Call him, Sarah," I said, a wave of cold focus washing over the physical pain in my stomach. "Tell him I'll sign whatever he needs, but we have to move fast. If Julian realizes the basement server is still functional, he'll burn the entire building down to destroy the evidence." Suspense hung in the air like a heavy fog. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus Vance arrived at my hospital room. He was a tall, gray-haired man with an incredibly calm demeanor, carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked older than I was. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He plugged the silver flash drive into his tablet and began reviewing the payroll records, his face completely unreadable. "This is remarkably thorough work, Sarah," Marcus said, his voice a low, soothing baritone. Julian wasn't just stealing, Leo. He was using a classic ghost payroll system to inflate the operational expenses of municipal contracts. The state pays for 40 men, you use 12, and Julian pockets the difference through phantom identities. It's grand larceny, wire fraud, and a direct violation of the state's procurement laws. "Can we stop him from selling the assets?" I asked, my breath catching as my stitches pulled. "We can," Marcus said, looking at me over his glasses, "but to do it cleanly, without allowing his legal team to freeze the company in probate for the next 5 years, we need him to commit to the fraud publicly. Tomorrow evening is the annual Thorne Sons Founders Dinner. It's a massive charity gala where all the city officials, the union leaders, and the regional banks gather to celebrate the company's history. Julian is planning to use that stage to officially announce his new corporate partnership and the liquidation of the old yards." Marcus leaned in closer, his eyes reflecting the sharp light of his tablet. "I can prepare an emergency federal injunction and a corporate seizure warrant, but I won't file it until the exact moment he takes the microphone tomorrow night. We will let him state, on the record, that he has absolute, unconstrained control over the financial records. We will let him trap himself." The anticipation was almost too much to bear. I had less than 24 hours to prepare my body and my mind for a public execution of my brother's entire existence. I had to play the part of the broken, defeated field hand, while Marcus and Sarah set the legal jaws of the trap. The next 14 hours were an absolute gauntlet of physical and mental endurance. 6 a.m. I forced myself out of the hospital bed, the sheer agony of my incision making me dizzy. The night nurse caught me trying to put on my jeans and threatened to call security. I had to look her dead in the eye and say, "My father's company is being stolen today. You can either help me get dressed, or you can watch me walk out of here in a hospital gown." She saw the look on my face, went quiet, and helped me tape a thick protective pad over my stitches. 9 a.m., Marcus Vance sent me a copy of the finalized federal whistleblower affidavit. My hand was shaking so hard from the post-surgery weakness that my signature looked like a jagged mountain range. Every hour felt like a ticking bomb. If Julian checked the basement terminal server logs, he would know Sarah had access to the files. 12 p.m., I received a cold, automated email notification from our corporate HR department. My health insurance through Thorne Sons had been officially transitioned to a temporary suspension status due to my medical leave of absence. It was a petty, vicious move by Julian to show me exactly who held the power. I didn't get angry. I just saved the email to the flash drive. 3 p.m. The physical toll was becoming dangerous. My fever was returning, my skin feeling hot and clammy under my shirt. Sarah kept checking my pulse in the car, her face filled with intense anxiety. "Leo, you're burning up," she said, adjusting the car's heater. "We can just let Marcus handle the legal side. You don't need to be there." "I have to look him in the eye, Sarah," I said, leaning my head against the cold glass of the window. "Dad always said, if you're going to call out a bad build, you stand right under the beam when you do it. I have to be there." 5 p.m. We arrived at the luxury downtown hotel where the founders' dinner was being held. The grand ballroom was spectacular, filled with massive ice sculptures, crystal chandeliers, and hundreds of wealthy guests dressed in black tie attire. Through the glass doors, I saw Julian standing near the stage. He was wearing a stunning designer tuxedo, holding a glass of vintage champagne, laughing warmly with the city's mayor and 3 prominent land developers from New York. He looked like the absolute king of the city. He looked completely untouchable. I stood in the shadows of the coat check room, my old suit jacket feeling tight across my bandaged abdomen. The internal struggle was a deep, hollow ache. This was my brother, the boy I used to teach how to cast a fishing line in the mountain streams, the boy who cried when he broke his arm, whom I carried 2 miles back to Dad's truck on my shoulders. How had we ended up here? How had money and greed completely rotted out his soul? 5:45 p.m. Marcus Vance slipped through the side entrance of the ballroom, dressed in a sharp gray suit. He caught my eye and gave a single slow nod. The federal marshal was waiting in a black sedan right outside the kitchen doors. The countdown was down to 15 minutes. The anticipation was a suffocating pressure in my chest. I took one deep, painful breath, straightened my tie, and prepared to step into the light. The room went entirely silent as the master of ceremonies took the microphone at the main podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 31st Annual Thorne Sons Founders Dinner," the announcer's voice boomed through the massive sound system. "Please welcome your new Chief Executive Officer, Julian Thorne." The ballroom erupted into loud applause. Julian stepped up the stairs onto the stage, his smile radiant, his posture filled with an absolute, unshakable confidence. He raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "Thank you, everyone," Julian began, his voice carrying that practiced, effortless charm. "As we look to the future, Thorne Sons is entering a new era of global modernization. My father built this company on local values, but today we expand. I am proud to announce that as the sole executive authority of this enterprise, I have finalized a multi-million-dollar corporate merger with the Sterling Investment Group. This partnership will redefine the infrastructure of our city." "The only thing you finalized, Julian, is your own indictment." A voice cut through the applause from the back of the room. The crowd turned in a wave of shocked confusion. I walked slowly down the center aisle of the ballroom, the bright spotlights catching my pale face and my left hand, which was still wrapped in hospital gauze. Julian's smile instantly froze. His eyes widened into a look of absolute fury as he gripped the edges of the podium. "Leo!" Julian stammered, his voice carrying through the active microphone before he could cut it off. "What are you doing here? You're medically incapacitated. Security, please escort my brother back to his vehicle. He's clearly disoriented from his recent surgery." 2 large security guards stepped toward me, but Marcus Vance immediately stepped out from the side aisle, holding a thick leather folder aloft. "Nobody touches this man," Marcus announced, his voice carrying a cold, prosecutorial authority that made the guards pause instantly. "I am Marcus Vance, representing Leo Thorne as an official corporate whistleblower under the Federal Claims Act. We are here to present an emergency federal injunction against any sale or merger of Thorne and Sons." The ballroom exploded into frantic whispering. The mayor looked deeply uncomfortable and immediately stepped away from the main VIP table. "Leo, stop this embarrassing scene," Julian shouted, leaning over the podium, his face flushing a bright, angry purple. "You've always been jealous of my education. You've always tried to bully me out of the front office because you want to spend your life playing in the mud. I have the absolute legal right to manage this company. The board voted me in. Every single payroll record, every bank transfer, and every operational contract bears my sole signature." "I'm so glad you stated that on the record, Julian," I said, finally reaching the front of the stage. My abdomen was burning like an open flame, but my voice was completely steady. "Because those exact payroll records are about to send you to federal prison." I reached into my pocket and handed the silver flash drive directly to the technical crew managing the ballroom's massive projection screens. They looked at Marcus Vance, who showed them a signed court order, and they quickly plugged it into the master system. "Look at the main screens, everyone," I said, turning back to face the crowd of city officials and lenders. The massive digital displays behind Julian shifted from a corporate logo to a stark, terrifying spreadsheet. It showed the active billing accounts for the municipal bridge contract, highlighted in bright yellow next to the hidden encryption logs from the basement terminal server. "What you are looking at," I announced, my voice echoing through the silent room, "is a deliberate, systematic ghost payroll operation. For the past 12 months, my brother has been overbilling the city for 28 non-existent concrete laborers every single week. He has been stealing millions of taxpayer dollars and routing them through a shell company registered to his personal penthouse address." "That's a lie," Julian screamed, his voice cracking as he slammed his fist onto the wooden podium, knocking the microphone sideways. "Those are field logs. Leo managed the field. If those records are fraudulent, then he was the one who stole the money. He's trying to frame me because I took his title." "Julian," Marcus Vance said, stepping up the stairs onto the stage, his face a mask of absolute icy calm. The encryption logs on the right side of the screen show the exact digital footprint of the user who authorized those phantom transfers. Every single update was made from your personal corporate terminal between the hours of 8 p.m. and midnight, long before the field crews had gone home. And more importantly, the banks have verified that the destination account is held solely under your legal name. Julian looked up at the screens. He saw the timestamp entries. He saw his own unique user ID printed in stark white text next to millions of illegal transactions. The absolute, terrifying realization of his defeat hit him like a physical blow. He staggered backward away from the podium, his champagne glass slipping from his hand and shattering loudly against the wooden stage floor. "You didn't look at the cloud server?" Julian whispered, his eyes wild as he looked down at me. "I deleted the files. I checked the cloud myself." "You forgot about the basement array, Julian," I said, looking at him with a mixture of intense satisfaction and deep, heartbreaking sorrow. "The one Dad and I built 15 years ago, the one that actually stores the raw truth of this company. You were so busy looking at the sky, you forgot to check the foundation." The side doors of the ballroom swung open with a heavy thud. 2 uniformed federal marshals walked down the center aisle, their badges glinting under the crystal chandeliers. Julian looked at them, then looked at the crowd of his wealthy friends, who were now actively turning their backs to him to avoid being captured in the media photos. His magnificent empire had vanished in less than 10 minutes. The legal landslide that followed the founders' dinner completely crushed Julian's world. Because the evidence on the flash drive was entirely ironclad and verified by federal forensic accountants, Julian's defense team couldn't find a single loophole to exploit. Within 3 months, he accepted a plea bargain to avoid a maximum 20-year sentence. He was convicted of grand larceny, wire fraud, and systematic corporate embezzlement, receiving a mandatory 8-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, along with a $6 million restitution order that completely wiped out his personal assets. His luxury penthouse was seized and liquidated by the state. His expensive suits, his gold watches, and his sports cars were auctioned off to help repay the city for the overbilled municipal contracts. He went from being the self-proclaimed king of the city's infrastructure to a line number in a federal inmate registry. The social fallout was just as absolute. The Sterling Investment Group immediately withdrew from the merger, issuing a formal public apology and stating they had been completely deceived by Julian's fraudulent financial statements. The board of directors, terrified of being held legally liable for Julian's actions, voted unanimously to reinstate me as the sole absolute chairman and CEO of Thorne Sons. I managed the aftermath with a cold, controlled precision. I didn't celebrate his downfall. The day after his sentencing, I walked into the main administrative building and personally promoted Sarah to Chief Financial Officer. "We do things Dad's way from now on, Sarah," I told her, setting a new, transparent accounting framework on her desk. "Every dime is accounted for. Every worker gets their full due." The physical company survived, but it was a grueling process. I had to meet with the city council and the union leaders individually, showing them the raw server logs and proving that the field operations were completely clean of the fraud. Because of my lifelong reputation for honesty, the union stood by me, and the city allowed us to finish the municipal bridge contract without penalties. The physical yard office changed too. I ordered Julian's expensive leather furniture and espresso machines to be sold. We used the money to upgrade the safety gear and purchase the high-tensile rigging cables that Mac had been begging for. The company went back to its roots, smelling of diesel grease, sharp sawdust, and the honest sweat of men who actually worked for a living. It is now an exceptionally beautiful spring morning, exactly 1 year since that chaotic night in the ballroom. The air is warm and crisp, carrying the steady, rhythmic hum of our heavy dump trucks rolling out of the main quarry gates. I am sitting on the wide wooden porch of the main yard office, holding a stained ceramic mug of black coffee. My surgical scar still hitches slightly when the weather changes, but the physical pain is entirely gone, replaced by a deep, unshakable sense of peace. I watch as Mac and his crew guide a massive concrete girder onto the bed of a heavy transport truck, their movements synchronized and completely safe. They aren't lines on a ledger anymore. They are the living, breathing heart of Thorne Sons. I feel a profound calm washing over me. The reflection I see in the office window isn't the broken, exhausted field hand who let his brother step all over him out of a false sense of family peace. It's the face of a man who knows exactly how to build a structure that can survive a storm. I realized that Julian's ultimate betrayal was actually the exact catalyst I needed to stop hiding in the dirt and start leading this company with the authority my father always intended for me to have. I visited Julian in prison once, about 2 weeks ago. He looked smaller in his green inmate uniform, his sleek charm entirely stripped away by the harsh reality of his surroundings. He wouldn't look me in the eye, he just stared at the plastic table between us. "I did what I thought was necessary to make the company huge, Leo," he muttered, his voice hollow. "A company doesn't need to be huge to be strong, Julian," I told him quietly before I walked out. "It just needs to be honest." I don't carry any malice toward him anymore. The anger has completely dissolved, leaving behind nothing but a quiet lesson. I walk down the porch steps and head toward the maintenance shops, my muddy boots sinking into the familiar solid gravel of the yard. I stop by the old server room in the basement, patting the cold metal frame of the backup array that saved our lives. The foundation is now solid, the structure is true, and as I look up at the morning sun rising over the quarry, I know my father would be proud of the build. A legacy isn't built out of money, corporate titles, or slick legal strategies. It's built out of the trust you earn from the people who stand in the trenches with you and the honesty you bring to the job every single day. My story proves that when you try to tear down a foundation built on hard work and truth, the whole structure will eventually come crashing down on your own head. I want to ask you a very real question. Have you ever had a business partner or a family member try to take credit for your hard work while you were completely helpless? Have you ever discovered a hidden truth that completely changed the balance of power in your own life? How did you find the strength to stand up and reclaim what you built? Please share your personal experiences and your own stories of resilience in the comments below. I read through every single one, and your individual journeys of survival are what make this community so incredibly inspiring. If you felt a sense of justice and satisfaction in Leo's fight to save Thorne Sons from corporate greed, hit that like button. It significantly helps our videos reach other field hands and hard workers who might be facing their own corporate storms right now. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you never miss another long-form story of deep betrayal, financial investigation, and ultimate emotional resolution. Keep your foundations strong and your books clean. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there on the job.